in the first four presentations, we really focused on the chapters in the Torah and the prophets and the writings that speak of this kingdom. We didn't get very much into the New Testament. And then at the last session, we talked about Psalms. But in order to jump into the New Testament, it's really important to recognize that its foundation is the Torah and the prophets. It's built upon that. It's not the other way around. As Christians, we kind of grew up with the idea that the foundation is the New Testament. We try to fit in the prophets and the Torah and everything, but that's really kind of backwards. When the New Testament writers and speakers speak, and you listen to their words very carefully, they always proclaim that the Torah, the writings, the prophets are the foundation of what they're talking about. So my point is that if we're going to look at the New Testament, we better make sure it's 100% based on the Torah, or else we've made our own loaf. And so I just want to base this discussion of Matthew and its teachings on the kingdom of heaven on the fact that we've already read about a kingdom that involves, and again, these are the words of Scripture, every kindred, tongue, and people. Over and over and over, we read every nation, every kindred, tongue, and people. And, you know, Yahuwah is not limited to the future. He is certainly the Elohim of the past, of all who have lived. And so I'm just saying that in those words, if you really think about what they mean, they would have to include everybody. Every kindred, tongue, and people has to include every kindred, tongue, and people. So we have a kingdom whose purpose is to teach every kindred, tongue, and people about Yahuwah and his Torah, his Messiah, about his stuff, his Moedim, his Sabbaths, the things that you talked about. And people will say, well, the Christian church took the gospel to the whole world. Did they? Did they teach about Yahuwah? Has any Christian missionary taught people Yahuwah's name, about his Moedim, about his Torah, the fact that not a jot or a tittle of the Torah will change? Has the Christian church fulfilled that prophecy in any way? Have the people who received that message come to an understanding of Yahuwah, who he is, what that name implies, all the traits of that name through his character, through his Torah, through his Moedim and his Sabbath? That has not been accurately brought to the world. So the Christian church did not fulfill the Great Commission in any way. The purpose of this coming kingdom is to fulfill that commission. In Isaiah, we're told that in the last days, in that day, everyone will know Yahuwah. Know Yahuwah. And in all that name implies, they will know Yahuwah to the extent that he chooses to reveal himself to the world, they will know him. Then he can judge righteously. So as you look at the book of Matthew, and it speaks of the kingdom over and over and over again, the first question that I always think of is, does it agree with what we read in the Torah and the prophets and the writings? The Torah is the test. To the Torah and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, there's no light in them. So even the book of Matthew is subject to that test. Does it agree with the Torah? In Matthew 3, he speaks of teshuvah, or return, repent, the preaching of John the Baptist, because the kingdom of heaven is being offered. So right there is teshuvah, return to the works of the Torah. There's one of the first proofs, one of the first tests. Matthew is calling us not to a new gospel, a new teaching, some new concept. He's calling us to return to the blessing that's already been given, the Torah of Yahweh. Turn in repentance, for the kingdom of heaven is offered. Matthew 4, announcing the good news of the kingdom. What is the good news of the kingdom? From the very beginning, what has been the good news of the kingdom? He said that through the seed of Abraham, all families of the earth will be blessed. The good news goes all the way back to Genesis. He said he would bless everyone on the earth, all families of the earth, and he spoke that to Abraham. Now, if people who were born or alive at Abraham's time or born after that up until the coming of the Messiah are just automatically cut out of this blessing of the kingdom because they were born at the wrong time, then that prophecy is a lie. He said all families of the earth will be blessed, and he spoke that way, way back in the beginning. So for us to say today, oh, people who lived and died and never knew Messiah or never knew Yeshua, they're just lost, or if they didn't respond to some dream or some vision in the night or some moving of the spirit in the leaves or on a bird or something, they're lost. That nullifies the whole purpose of this coming kingdom, which he said was this kingdom is to bless every person, every family that has lived on the earth. That's the good news is the good news that the kingdom is available to anyone who's ever lived. That's great news. This isn't some exclusive thing. You know, you see the parable of the prodigal son and his older brother, how he wanted to just keep that blessing to himself. It comes right out of Jeremiah 21, where, you know, Judah is trying to just hold on to this and make it their own private little party. That was never the plan, never, ever the plan. The plan was that through them, all families of the earth would be blessed. That's the good news. The good news is that the kingdom's purpose is to save every person. And Peter, he said, he's not willing that any should perish. That goes forward and backward. Matthew 5, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that's probably a really poor translation, the poor in spirit. I mean, he said that all who seek him would find him. To seek is to recognize a need. So when I read poor in spirit, these are people who recognize, hey, we're in darkness, but there's the kingdom of light. And anyone who will respond to that, who will hear his offer to come, to be part of this, anyone who recognizes that they have a need and they're seeking, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. To anyone who's ever lived, who recognizes a need in their life, that they're in darkness, but there is offered the kingdom of light. They're hungry, but there is offered sustenance. They're naked, but there is offered the clothing of righteousness. Anyone who recognizes the need in their life, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. The gates are open and they're welcome. And that's anyone who's ever lived, I argue. Every nation, kindred, tongue, people, all families of the earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who recognize their need, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's to whom it's offered. Matthew 5:10, happy are they which are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. How many people through time have been persecuted as they've tried to observe the Torah? To them also the kingdom of heaven exists. And then looking at patterns within patterns, looking at Matthew 5:17, here he's established that people are at the boundary, at the gate, ready to come in to the kingdom. And what's the first thing they encounter? Think not that I have come to abolish the Torah and the prophets. There's the picture you always describe of the altar with the lines of the Torah. You have people recognizing there's the kingdom, I can come in. The first thing I'm confronted with, here's the blessing of the Torah of freedom. Think not that I've come to abolish the Torah and the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not a yod or a hook will pass from the Torah until they all be fulfilled. Heaven and earth certainly exist. The Torah still exists. Whosoever shall abolish one of the least of these instructions and shall teach the sons of men so, the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Think about the ramifications of that. We've read over that probably 1,000 times in our lives. But here's a concept that it's possible to be least in the kingdom. Again, as Christians, most of us had this idea we go to heaven, we're all equal there, or but here is a kingdom in which so many of the other understandings of the kingdom that we've read about in the Old Testament make sense, where David said, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my Elohim than to be out in darkness. So there are certainly different levels of existence in this kingdom. Every single one of Messiah's parables regarding a marriage implies a hierarchy. There is a groom and a bride. There are bridesmaids. There are attendants. There are servers. There are ushers who seat the people. There's the flower girl and the ring bearer and all the people in the wedding. There are the invited guests. There are the parking attendants. Every time a wedding is described in a parable, there is a hierarchy of people in that event. You have the same thing in this kingdom. This absolutely implies that there is an element to which our relationship and our walk in Torah positions us in that kingdom. The bride, described by Yeshua as someone he will not let a hair of her head be touched. He is so devoted to her. He describes it as a marriage in which they are literally married together, echad, they're one. And yet he doesn't have that same relationship with bridesmaids, certainly. He doesn't have that same relationship with the guests at the wedding. So there's a hierarchy. Whosoever shall keep one of these least commandments and teach the sons of men, so shall be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. There again, I would argue, I don't think he's even describing the bride. When I think of my wife, Rhonda, I don't call her my greatest friend. She's not even on the same plane. I don't even think of her in a hierarchy of relationship. So here, when he says greatest in the kingdom of heaven, he's still not describing the bride, maybe at best a bridesmaid. When you're one with your your mate, your bride, your spouse, you don't put them on the same plane of ladder of hierarchy,
whole different category.
Relationships and friends. Exactly. He says, then I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes, you will not even get into the kingdom of heaven. Boy, there's a picture. Imagine the scribes and the Pharisees, if they were to wake up and be outside the kingdom. I would say that there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and we'll get to that later. But those who expected to be in the kingdom and find themselves out, perhaps even those who find themselves at a very low level, will be terribly disappointed. But the purpose of the kingdom is to bring everyone in. At the end, I believe, there'll only be two camps. There'll be Yeshua and his bride, and there'll be those who are not. The point of the kingdom is to elevate everyone to the level of bride. Matthew 5:20, the righteousness of those in the kingdom will exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Matthew 6, in his prayer, thy kingdom come. That's an interesting phrase too. Throughout Matthew is the idea that the kingdom of heaven is offered, and yet when Yeshua prayed, he prayed, thy kingdom come. There's that idea that we can live as if we live in the kingdom, and Eric and I and our families, we choose to live as if the kingdom is established right now. We are trying to walk in the instructions of the kingdom and to experience the blessings of the kingdom right here. But there is certainly a kingdom coming, because there's a time coming where we've read in the Torah and the prophets where his nation, all of his people, will keep his Torah in the land, in the place that he gave to our fathers, and that he will bless us beyond the way that he blessed our fathers. So there's not only the concept that the kingdom is here now, but certainly that it's coming. Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Adonai, Adonai, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father, which is in heaven. That same will enter with me into the kingdom of heaven. Well, read that again. He said,
whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do.
Works that I do. What works did Yeshua do?
Well, healing people and walking on water. And
that was minor. That was easy. I'm just saying.
Walking on water and raising the dead was easy compared to what?
He was the living Torah. He was the image of Yahuwah in the world. He was the Torah with skin on. Likewise, those who believe in him will be the living, breathing, speaking, acting Torah. I would argue that writing his character on the heart of his people is a far greater miracle than walking on water. That's an easy trick for the Creator. But to change the human heart, to make it willing to receive his Torah, to have it written on it, that is the greatest miracle of all. Many will say to me in that day, Adonai, Adonai, did we not eat and drink in your name? Have we not prophesied in your name? These are people who fully expect to be in the kingdom. And in your name we've done these tricks, these miracles. We've cast out Shadim. And in your name we've done many wonderful works. And then I'll profess to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, for you are Torahless. Gosh. So, once again, raising the dead, doing miracles is not the test. That's not what makes us part of the kingdom. It's hearing his words and doing it. He who does the will of my Father. Whoever hears these words and does them is comparable to a wise man who built his house upon a rock. The rain descended and the flood came and the wind blew and they beat upon that house, but it fell not, for it was built upon a rock. But whoever hears these words and does them not is comparable to a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rain descended, the flood came, the wind blew, and they beat upon that house. You remember in Revelation, he talks about a time when this abomination of desolation is set up and his bride has to flee, to pray that your flight be not in the wind or on the Sabbath day. She flees into the wilderness and the serpent sends a flood after her. Here's people who built their house upon a rock, and what does he do? He opens up the earth and he swallows up that flood. It's the same kind of language. Those who build their house upon the rock, that house will stand no matter what happens. Matthew 8 follows that same theme where he says, I tell you, many will come from the east and the west, and they'll recline with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom. They'll be literally learning from him. Many from the east and the west. When the scripture speaks of from the east and the west, I mean, that's all encompassing. But then he talks about how many who think they were children of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness. They will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's that same concept that many will say Adonai, Adonai, and find out they never did what he said. They're not part of the kingdom, at least when it starts. Matthew 9:13. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Again, that same concept. Boy, if he's come to call sinners, who would fit in that category? Would not just about every one of us who's ever lived? I mean, that's sinners would start with Adam and Hava. I mean, do we exclude them? Do we exclude the antediluvian world? Do we exclude the Jebusites, the Perizzites, all the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of Canaan that Israel slaughtered? Are they not sinners? Are they not called to repentance? He says, I've not come to call the righteous. We really get focused on the righteous, but he said the purpose of the kingdom is for the sinners. He went about all the cities, teaching the synagogues, declaring the good news of the kingdom. Matthew 10:5. Yeshua sent out the 12, commanding them, go not in the way of the Goyim and not into the cities of the Samaritans, but go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, saying the kingdom of heaven is up. That's saying that the purpose of the kingdom is to call all sinners to repentance, and he's not willing that any should be lost. The commission he gave to his disciples was not to go out and save the whole world. It was to find the bride. The bride had been scattered. The seed of this kingdom, the people that Yahweh said were going to teach all nations, every kindred, tongue, and people about him, had failed. She had lost her way. She had been cut off, divorced, sent into the wilderness. And he told his disciples, go find her. And I really believe that the purpose, his purpose for the last 2,000 years has not been to save the whole world. It's been to establish the bride, the one that he would be united with, who will sit down beside him and rule and reign with a rod of iron. That's the purpose that he gave those men, to go out and find the lost sheep of the house of Israel, to regather Israel, to make it one stick in his hand, one tree, a united kingdom, a bride that is not divided, that is not double-minded, that is not lost, a bride who knows who she is, who knows who he is, who knows what he loves, who is passionate about him, who is worthy to sit down with him and be one with him and to rule and reign and to teach every kindred, tongue, and people, to bless all the families of the earth. That's who he was intent on finding. Matthew 13:31, the kingdom of heaven is comparable to a grain of mustard seed, the least of all seeds. So he's describing something small, but it becomes the greatest of herbs, becomes a tree, and the birds of heaven come and nest in its branches. What does that language remind you of? Remember the little stone that came down, this small thing that one would hardly notice, not made with hands? And it comes down and it knocks down the image of Daniel 2, the image of all human authority and religion and politics, that head of gold and shoulder and arms of silver, and then down through the bronze and the iron, the feet of clay and an iron. That whole thing comes crashing down and disappears because of a little stone that seems insignificant. Well, here's that seed he's talking about, the least of all seeds, and yet it grows and fills the whole earth. Well, the trees and the birds of heaven come and nest in its branches. That's where I was thinking of Ezekiel. Remember that river that flows out, that starts very small and insignificant out of the temple? I think it's Matthew 37, the temple that has never been built. Out of that temple flows a little stream. It's just enough to cover your toes. But then as Ezekiel walks out, it gets deeper and deeper until it becomes a great mighty river. And the trees that grow beside it, the leaves are for the healing of the nations. That same concept here, the trees and the birds of heaven come and they nest in its branches. Herbs are for healing. That same language is all through Matthew. What did he say over and over? And you will be my people, and I will be your Elohim. That's been his dream from the beginning. He's been dreaming of this day, this kingdom. How could he possibly have a dream like this, send this dream out and have it not be fulfilled? And how could he have this passionate dream if its purpose was not to seek and to save every single person? He said he's not willing that any should be lost. This passionate dream of his is to save, its purpose is to save the whole world, every single man, woman, and child, every creation of his. We could just go on and on. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman put into 3 measures of meal, and it leavened the whole lump. We talked about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago. Again, that picture that this kingdom starts maybe insignificant, but once it gets going, the mustard seed is the least of all seeds, and yet when it grows, it's the greatest of all herbs. It's this huge tree. Those are all this concept that this kingdom begins small. It begins right here with people like this, listening to Yahuwah's words, contemplating his name, thinking about his stuff, and it will grow and fill the whole earth. There's so much power in what we're doing right now that it will knock down all the authority of men, all human religion, power, political power, geopolitical power,
military
power,
and economic too.
military power. It's all coming down because of what we're doing right here. Matthew, I'm still in Matthew 13. He has all these analogies. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure in the field, comparable to a merchant seeking pearls, who finds one so precious he sells all that he has to buy it. It's like a dragnet that's cast into the sea. Well, there's another picture. If the sea is a picture of multitudes of people, here's the kingdom of heaven sweeping through the waters of the earth, looking for anyone who will respond. Matthew 18. This is great. He said, his disciples came, who will be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Whosoever will humble himself. In other words, anyone who recognizes their need. It's that same picture of the poor in spirit. The kingdom of heaven is for those who recognize that they're in darkness, but light is offered, that they're hungry, but sustenance is offered, that they're naked, but the clothing of righteousness is offered. Anyone who reaches out, that's what the kingdom of heaven is all about. The Son of Man came to save that which was lost. It's like a king who wished to make a reckoning with his servants, and he found one who owed him 10,000 talents, an unfathomable debt, but the king forgave it. But that servant went out and refused to forgive a debt. It was just peanuts, and the king delivered him into prison until the unfathomable debt was paid. Forgiveness is offered in this kingdom, and anyone who recognizes their need for forgiveness, anyone who is poor or they're poor in spirit, is welcome into this kingdom. Matthew 19. Actually, let me skip up to Matthew 20. The kingdom of heaven is like a householder who hired workers to tend his vineyard. All the vineyard workers all got a day's wages, in spite of the fact that some had worked the whole day and some had only worked at the end. Boy, isn't that a perfect picture of that older brother and the prodigal son who says, wow, haven't I been devoted to you, my father, my whole life? And yet this clown brother of mine has gone out and wasted all of his inheritance, and yet you bring us back as equals. And that's exactly what happens. The kingdom of heaven is for those who lived their whole lives not knowing who he was, and yet here they're offered an opportunity to understand him and his kingdom and come into it, and they're treated and loved with the same compassion and forgiveness that those of us who have walked in his Torah all of our lives. The purpose of the kingdom is to seek and to save all who are lost. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a marriage for his son and his servants, to call all who were invited to the marriage. But many who were invited refused. And again he sent other servants, saying, behold, I've prepared my banquet, my oxen, my geese are cooked, and all things are ready. Come to the marriage. But everyone had an excuse and ignored or even killed some of the servants, and his anger was kindled. Think about that. What, in the end, who did that invitation go out to? It went out to everyone. Remember, he said, just go out in the streets, call in anybody you can. Every kindred, tongue, and people, all families of the earth. Again, nobody is excluded just because they lived at the wrong time. The kingdom of heaven is available to anyone. Its purpose is that to seek and to save all. Matthew 24 is such a big topic, and it's amazing. And I'm not going to have time to get into it, but if you'll look at Matthew 24, at the very beginning, his disciples ask a question. And if you look at that question carefully, it's actually three. They're looking at they pull Yeshua out to look at the beautiful temple and its surroundings and its foundations. And he says to them, I tell you, there'll not be left here one stone upon another. And they're horrified to hear that. And they say, oh, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And I'm convinced that in their minds, the destruction of the temple had to be synonymous with his coming, the destruction associated with his coming and of the end of the age. But actually they asked three different questions. And so if you read through Matthew 24, Yeshua very carefully and very precisely answers those three questions in three very distinct ways, because those are very different events. We know that temple came down in AD 70, and we know that the sign of his coming which would be sometime during this kingdom, is not the end of the age when the final judgment occurs at the very end. Those are three distinct events. And if you read Matthew 24 really carefully, he answers those three questions independently with three very different answers. But it takes a while to go through that, so maybe I better
You mean like
hold
next
that
week,
for
maybe?
another day. Well, if you're still around, or if we're still together.
Well, we got 5 minutes before we have to end the first hour here.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to say anything in the last 5 minutes of a
Okay.
overview of what you're talking
Sure.
about?
I think I mentioned during some of the earlier programs that I hadn't really gotten through the New Testament much. I've been through Acts now and Yaakov, or the book of James, and I'm continuing to go through the words of the New Testament, and I'm finding absolute harmony with everything that we read in the Torah and the prophets and the writings. But I hope that others of you have time to study this as well. Obviously, there are a lot of questions. This idea raises perhaps as many questions as it answers, and I can't say that I can answer every one of those questions. But I think that every one of these words, every one of these prophecies, has to be fulfilled. It has to be true. None of this was done away with, and so it's really our job to hear these words and to put them together, and to embrace the idea that we're to walk, first of all, in his Torah. We're to have it written on our hearts and on our lives, and that our highest calling is to be the bride. That's really our job and our highest honor and our greatest gift. To be his bride during this kingdom, I believe, will be the greatest experience of human existence that has ever occurred. And to blow this off, or to say, hey, I'll come into the kingdom later, or if the purpose of the kingdom is to seek and to save everyone, then does it make any difference? I say it makes a huge difference, because to receive the promises that are applied only to the bride, the promise of Psalm 91, that he'll never let her even be injured, let her foot dash against a stone, that though 10,000 fall at her side, it will not come nigh her. The promise that he will not let a hair of her head be touched. The promise that she will rule and reign with him with a rod of iron. The promise that the kings of the earth will bring the wealth of the world and lay them at her feet because of what she has to offer. Those promises and that experience will be, I believe, the most amazing experience that any human has ever had. And it is our great honor and privilege to be invited to be his bride, to have these words written upon our hearts, and to be one with him in such a way that we rule and reign with him through this period of time. So that's just the most exciting news, the most exciting expectation that any human being could ever have.
But you had mentioned there's a particular verse, I think it's in Jeremiah 23, where it says, behold, I'm going to do a new thing in the world. It's like, oh, what's this great new thing going to be? And he says, the woman will surround the man. So can you give just real quick before we go with just the last few seconds, how do you take that to mean? What does that mean, the woman will surround the man?
I think that's the most beautiful picture. Throughout the Torah and the prophets, you see Yahuwah pursuing his bride. He tries to impress her with his power and his strength and his ability to protect her, and he tries to frighten her into his arms, and he tries to seduce her. You see Yahuwah using every possible means to enter into a passionate, intimate, lifelong relationship with his people. And finally, as you know, in the end, he says, hey, I give you over to other Elohim. You've been...
Just turns and walks away and says, you're on your own, goodbye.
Yeah, goodbye, And then in Jeremiah, he comes around with this idea, behold, I'll show you a new thing. A woman will encircle or dance around a man. I believe that's where we are now. As this time of darkness that he said would happen, where we would forget who he is, we'd forget who we are, and we would forget what we're supposed to be doing, and we would serve other Elohim. And now, as we come out of that darkness, the prophecy of Ezekiel, the 390 days times 7 has ended. It's time for the bride to wake up. And what are we doing? We're searching out these old, these ancient, these paleo Hebrew words and concepts and letters, and we are trying to apply them to our lives to catch his attention. We're trying to get him to look upon us with interest and with love and with compassion, and we're doing it by learning about his stuff and walking it out, by keeping his Moedim and his Sabbaths and his Torah, by discussing his name and his ways, by being passionate about the things that he's passionate about. We are dancing around him, trying to get his attention. Look at me, look at me. And that's exactly what Jeremiah said would happen. When my wife was 16 years old, I was leading a Bible study group. I was somewhat older than she. And she took an interest in me. I was very shy. And she, to get my attention, she immersed herself in the things that I loved. I loved steam locomotives, and I loved vintage cars, and I loved history, and I loved mathematics and science. And so she asked me to tutor her in calculus, and she asked me to tutor her in history so she could take exams in high school that allowed her to bypass college courses. And she built a model for me of a classic car, and she had a model train, you know, and I mean, she just took an interest in anything I was interested in. It's exactly where we are today. We are looking at these words that he wrote so long ago. We're trying to hear his heartbeat. We're trying to find out what he's passionate about, what he loves, and we're trying to show him that we love him by taking an interest in his things and elevating them to the highest that we possibly can, and carrying them out, walking them out in the very best way we can, so that he looks upon us and that he loves us and has compassion on us, and so that we can restore the relationship that he wanted to have with his people, so that we will be his people and he will be our Elohim. And that's a really unique thing. That is what establishes us as the bride. That's what makes us a people that he says, I will not let a hair of her head be touched. I think about the love I have for my wife and what I would do for her. That is exactly how he wants to care for his people. And that is what establishes the kingdom, because it's when this couple is brought together and they're one again that the kingdom can finally fulfill its purpose to teach his name and his ways to every kindred, tongue, and people.
That is time for a break.